to all of you who are here this morning. We were Crazy Faith. We were going to be in a joint worship service this morning with Liberty Hill Baptist Church, but the weather has been so stupid, and the building is shut down, and there's no shoveling or anything. So we were concerned that if we tried to trek over to the building, that we might get stuck or people might fall, which Jesus wouldn't want any of that to happen. So I decided I would just come on here and say good morning to you. We're not going to have a full worship service, absolutely not. But I wanted to say Merry Christmas to you and tell you thank you for listening to us. Those of you who have been listening and being with us, I just want to thank you for that because it really means a whole lot. And I also find myself, I've been saying to people that I've been trying to be intentionally grateful, intentionally grateful, and I am intentionally grateful for the changes that COVID brought. Because back in the day, maybe 3 years ago, when the weather was bad. If it didn't, if you couldn't go to the building, the churches just shut down, and you didn't have any church service at all. Now, with all of the internet and all the technology that we have, people are having church, and there are people in churches this morning where, the heat is on and the walks are shoveled and the parking lot is shoveled, and they're going to have church on today. They're going to have it, and so. If that is something that you are looking forward to today, isn't it a good thing? I mean, thanks be to COVID. Although COVID was a horrendous, horrendous thing, and it's still with us. It has forced some changes with all of us, and even the definition of congregation and how we look at church and how we do church differently, and all of that. So we have some opportunities now that we did not have or did not know that we had before COVID. That being said, I pause and pay homage to those of you who have lost loved ones to COVID. That grieving process I know is ongoing, made especially worse because many times you couldn't see your loved ones when they were sick, and you couldn't bury them the way you wanted. You couldn't have the repast like you wanted. So this is a peculiar and particularly hard season of grieving for a lot of people. And then you also add the fact that many people commit suicide in this time of year, suicide and domestic violence. So I just kind of want to pause and let you know, those who are suffering with emotions and situations like that I pray. I actually pray every year for those who are hurting. I pray for those who are hurting because the holidays are the roughest time. So if we had been in church, I was going to talk to you a little bit about the problem with Jesus. And somebody's going to get mad and say, "What you talking about, the problem with Jesus?" But, Jesus being born is a gift to us from the way we have been taught our theology. But instead of us giving Jesus gifts, we go out and get broke and give other people gifts. And I still go back to that one line in a modern day version of A Christmas Carol when the guy says, "Why are we just, relegating one day to be nice to people? Why don't we do the nice thing 364 days a year, and on this 365th day, just, kind of relax?" I think that's a wonderful concept. But Jesus being born was a gift. Now, I'm making a distinction between Jesus and the church, because the church, many people have problems with the church. The church, not just churches in general. Churches have been known to be a little bit hypocritical and not so kind to people, and kind of exclusionary. And y'all know what I'm talking about. And the church has hurt a lot of people's feelings, and I know that. But Jesus is not the church. Bishop Desmond Tutu wrote a book called God is Not a Christian and Other Such Trivialities. God is not a Christian. Jesus didn't make the denominations. Jesus came to make community, and that's a gift, because when we are in community, that's when we are strongest. When we are scattered, as we are now, and as we have been in different parts of history, that's when we are weak, and that's when tyrannical governments can overtake us. But so all that made me think about Jesus being born. He was born in the midst of an empire, the Roman Empire, like we live in the American Empire. And he had a rough life. I mean, he had a rough life. He wasn't royalty. He was a poor, brown skinned Palestinian Jew. And in our study of the Magnificat for our Advent series, I was talking about how Mary was a revolutionary. She was a young 15-year-old girl. And when you're 15 years old and you see all the things that are going wrong around you in your city, in your county, in your state, in your nation, you say, what in the world? And you have a fervor and a fire because you just want to stop the foolishness. You want the bad stuff to stop, and you want good things to happen to people. She was 15 years old. She was pregnant, presumably out of wedlock, because like in my confirmation classes, kids said, Reverend Sue, how'd that happen? Don't ask me. I don't know how that happened, but it supposedly happened. But what did happen is that this baby was born, and when it was born, the leaders got kind of uptight. So I was thinking about this, and I was wondering, well, why would the leaders get all uptight? Because tyrannical leaders are pretty insecure. And Jesus came with this revolutionary message that was designed to save people from the grip of the empire, save people from their sins, save them from the pull of the empire that makes you go into debt, the empire that condones bigotry like sexism and racism and homophobia and all those things. Save us from all of that. Save us and draw us closer to God so that we could be in community. And so his words are a problem. So I was thinking this week, as I was thinking about the sermon, about the song that was in The Sound of Music, and it was called How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria? And that Maria was a nun in that movie, and she was played by Julie Andrews, and she was young and fresh and idealistic. She loved children, and she loved God, and she wanted to do right by both. The problem with her, though, is that she didn't like to follow the often strident rules of the convent, of the abbey, life. She was a free spirit. And the song goes, how do you solve a problem like Maria? The words are, she climbs a tree and scrapes her knee. Her dress has got a tear. You didn't do that back then. She waltzes on her way to mass. Oh gosh, how do you do that? And whistles on the stair. And underneath her wimple, she has curlers in her hair. I even heard her singing in the abbey. She's always late for chapel, but her penitence is real. She's always late for everything except for every meal. I hate to have to say it, but I very firmly feel Maria's not an asset to the Abbey. I'd like to say a word on her behalf. Maria makes me laugh. How do you solve a problem like Maria? How do you catch a cloud and pin it down? How do you find a word that means Maria? A flipper to bit, a will-o'-the-wisp, a clown? Many a thing you'd like to tell her, many a thing she ought to understand. But how do you make her stay and listen to all you say? How do you keep a wave upon the sand? How do you solve a problem like Maria? How do you hold a moonbeam in your hand? And when I thought of that song and I listened to it and I thought, well, how do you solve a problem like Jesus? He was somebody. He was, and in my meditation or in my sermon, I was talking about how last week I was talking about how he was raised by a revolutionary mother, and even though he was the son of God, he was also the son of Mary, and they depict Mary as this like quiet, uh, meek, silent. She was 15 years old and she didn't like what was going on in the world around her. That's why she prayed the Magnificat and she said out loud that rulers would be brought down. So, he was born and then he was raised by his mama and she taught him how to act. She taught him what to say, what to do. Um, she taught him to have compassion. She knew oppression. She knew rejection and poverty. She knew what life was like as a poor person and as a woman and a member of the underclass of society. She knew all of that. She knew all of that, and she knew that very few rich people cared about people like her or like her son now born. Um, she had seen how the church and the state exploited the poor people and used them and then threw them away. She knew it. So when she was chosen by God to carry God's child, she owned it. She owned it. She owned it. And she said an out loud prayer in which she described the God that she knew. That's like the enslaved people. They heard what the slave masters said about God, and they said, that ain't it. That ain't it. And they grasped the God that they had come to know. And Jesus' mama, Hers was a God who did not like or support financial ruination of so many people, while so few people enjoyed lives of contentment and ease. And so she said it out loud. She said it out loud. She talked about what her God would do to them, including bringing rulers down and sending rich people away hungry and empty in spite of her own hunger. So I shared last week that she would have been a revolutionary mother. Her personhood was so far different than the way she's been depicted. Her views of the empire and its minions didn't disappear just because she had a child. No, she raised that boy. I believe her views intensified in passion because she didn't want her child to suffer. She was like the mother and the family of Moses, who resorted to trickery in order to save him. The empire had always been the empire, and many who survived and many who helped others to survive. They survived because they were ready to take on the powers and the principalities that wanted to keep them in economic and social bondage. So we assumed that Mary, Jesus' mama, taught him about the world into which he had been born. She taught him that his life wasn't going to be easy. And in fact, his race and religion might pose a very threat to his life. Isn't that familiar? Um, but she taught him to stand. She taught him to stand for his principles. She taught him to stand for God. She taught him that all people mattered, even and especially those whom polite society threw away. She taught him that it was better to speak up for justice than to live in fear of the powers and principalities, and that if his speaking up caused him some problems, then so be it. I know that's how she had to have raised him because she was his mama. God was his father, his heavenly father, but she was his mama. And mamas do that. Mamas teach their kids how to live and survive and then thrive in this world that doesn't love them. This woman, Mary, was the mother of a brown-skinned Palestinian Jew who lived during the time of the Roman Empire. And so I do believe that she taught him what life in the empire was going to be like. So Jesus grew up. He got his spirit honest. He got it from his mother. And the result of that is that he taught us some stuff that we don't want to do. He taught us things like love your neighbor, love those who persecute you, and forgive those. If you don't forgive people, God won't forgive you. He taught them that it's a problem. It's just a problem because human beings don't want to do what Jesus said to do. What do you do with a problem like Jesus? And I say, you do Jesus to death. You do Jesus. You follow his words. You learn his words. You practice doing his words. You practice doing it. You practice building community. You practice embracing those whom you would like to throw away. You practice love. You practice forgiveness. That's what you do. Jesus came, and that's why I say he's a gift. He came to teach us how to do all of that. And those are the lessons that we find in the Gospels, the Sermon on the Mount, which is my favorite in the book of Matthew. It's in Luke too, but I like the one in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. He just lays it out. Boom, 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 boom. This is how you do it. When Christianity as a religion was formed, Jesus, the person, the baby who had been born, who grew up into a young man who died via state sanctioned violence, he was kind of forgotten. He was pushed over to the side because what Jesus wants is not what the empire wants. The empire wants money and power, and Jesus wants community. It's two different things. Jesus doesn't dislike. I mean, Jesus doesn't say you're a sinner if you want money. But you're a sinner if you put that between you and God. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about how we use the word sin, and I was thinking about, he came to save the people, he came to save people from their sins. That would be the sin of being separated from God, in order to be in alignment with the empire. In my own mind, I don't think Jesus cares if you wear red lipstick. My mama used to say that. If you wear red lipstick or clothes that are a little bit, risque, I don't think Jesus cares about that. But I do know, based on what Jesus said, that Jesus cares about how we treat each other. That is the evidence of our relationship and our connectedness to God. So in these days, with all the political stuff going on, it's really, really, really hard I mean, sometimes it's just hard to even look at people. You don't know who's a member of the party that wants to shut the government down, who wants to shut, Medicaid and Social Security and Medicare down and all of that. You don't know. You don't know the people who would, just as soon shoot a non-white, non-male person. You don't know. It's a very unsettling feeling. But even with that, Jesus would say, love your neighbor and forgive those. If you don't forgive them, God will not forgive you. There's that line. In the Lord's Prayer, we say it every week. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And so if we don't forgive people, we are giving God permission or Jesus permission not to forgive us. How do you solve a problem like Jesus? I hate that somebody's going to get mad, but I'm just saying his words are like, I've had people come up to me after sermons and say, he didn't really mean that. Well, I think he did. I think he did. I think he meant everything that he said. So how do you solve a problem like Jesus? You accept Jesus. I mean, you really accept Jesus. We're talking about accepting Jesus as personal Lord and Savior. You can't accept Jesus if you don't accept what he teaches, if you don't buy into it. So we accept Jesus and we work as hard as we can to do what Jesus taught us to do so that we can make life on earth as it in heaven. Without us doing our part, it can't happen. We are Christmas. There's a song that was sung by a young woman at Spelman College when my daughter was there, and I love that song. We are Christmas. We are God's hands. We are God's hands. We are God's helpers. We are God's co-creators. We are put here. We were allowed to be here because God wanted us to be created. But Jesus also wants us to do what Jesus tried to teach us to do. Jesus is not Christianity. Christianity is Christianity. Jesus was a person born of a woman and from God. And Jesus was put here to show us how to treat each other, show us how to be in community. And so I'm hoping on this day, as everybody gets presents, it's so much fun to open the presents, that somebody will stop and ask themselves, am I doing what Jesus told me to do? Am I giving Jesus the gift of my obedience? Am I giving Jesus the gift of my trust? Am I doing that? And it's hard when things are going wrong. It's hard for oppressed people to trust Jesus. You want to know why? Are things going so bad? Why don't you just fix things? Fret not thyself because of evildoers. Neither be thou envious against the workers of iniquity, but God in heaven knows it is hard not to fret. So on this Christmas day, I am hoping that some of us, maybe all of us, would stop and think about why Jesus was born. There's a very funny story too with this. Not maybe it's not funny, but it's very telling. When if you remember the story when Moses was born, he was going to be killed. Tyrants are tyrants, and then they've always been. The tyrants of today and the tyrants of yesterday are the same. But when Moses was born, and the Pharaoh was feeling threatened, the king was afraid of this little baby. The mom put her baby in a basket, and they sent him down the river. You know the story. And the Pharaoh, meanwhile, wanted to find out where this kid was, and got those two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, and told them to, kill baby boys when they were born. And Shiphrah and Puah said, okay, but they didn't do it. They didn't do it because they loved God. They loved God. And so when the babies were born, they just let them live. And so, several years down the pike, the Pharaoh said, well, why are all these babies still here? And they said, our women are just, they birth differently than you Romans do. And I mean, I'm sorry, than the Egyptians do. And so they just push those babies out, and before we can get, they push them out. We can't do anything. We can't kill them. So Pharaoh said, okay, I'm being played. But he got, awarded them or rewarded them for supposedly their work. And he ended up carrying out a campaign to kill the babies up to 2 years old. He just did that. Same thing happened with Jesus. Herod was not a good guy. He was a tyrant. He formed a police state. He was not a good person at all. And what he wanted was for, the story of the Magi. We make everything so fantastical. It's just a big myth. And these wonderful, quiet kings, the three kings, go to see this baby. And what we don't know, what we are not told, is that Pharaoh paid them. He wanted them to go and find out where the baby is and then come back and tell Pharaoh so that he could go and, so when the Magi see loved God. They loved God, and they gave him gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then they were told in a dream that, they should not go back to the king. So they went back home by a different route, and they never reported back to Herod. where the baby was. And so then he got mad. And again, just like pharaohs in front of him, or leaders or tyrants in front of him, he ordered infanticide, kill all the baby boys. We are blessed because Jesus survived that. We are blessed because he had a mother who listened to God, and he had an earthly father, Joseph, who heard God as well. And they got out of the manger and went to Egypt and stayed there until they were told to come out. So Jesus was born into a spirit of and a place of oppression. And still, he lived and he worked and he taught us. That's the I'll be working on and chewing on all day long. I'll chew on it too. So that's the end of my day. I wanted to say Merry Christmas to all of you. I hope you have a wonderful time. I hope you eat well and have wonderful, blessed times with your families. I hope that if you're in the cold like we are, that you stay inside and that you are warm. I hope that this is one of the best Christmases that you have ever had. And know this, that you are important to us, to Crazy Faith. We love that you come to us, that you listen to us, that you help us with our outreach. We love you for that. And we hope that you will continue to do that, because we believe the church is not where you go, but church is what you do. So that being said, Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next Sunday, the first day of the new year, 2023.